Hello and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews. Do you remember the part in The Lion King where Rafiki does a sick lip trick on an elephant skull to appease the souls of the dead? No? Well, that's because it doesn't happen. Do you know where it does happen though? Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure for the PS2. Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure is an odd little game that's not really remembered by anyone. The reason this is weird though is because it's technically a spin-off from the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series, which I think is safe to say is the most influential skating series ever made. You would automatically assume that a Disney skateboarding game would be a bit rubbish and maybe be around the same level of quality as The Simpsons skateboarding or other games like that. But what separates this game from the other Tony Hawk rip-offs is that Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure actually uses the exact same game engine that was used in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. This means it feels exactly the same as a Tony Hawk game. The physics, the way you perform tricks, and even the menus all work and look like a proper Tony Hawk game. And yet, this game seems to be a forgotten relic of the past. So, let's take a dive into the game to find out why. Jeez, is it just me or is that ident really annoying? But wait a minute, this game was made by Toys for Bob, the same Toys for Bob that later went on to make the Skylanders series and the Spyro Reignited trilogy. How crazy is that? Just like the earlier Tony Hawk games, this game doesn't have any story and begins with a live-action cutscene. But rather than being an introduction to the skaters featured in the game, it actually shows footage from a real skateboarding competition that Activision held, where kids from the ages of 6 to 14 took part to get featured in this upcoming game.
Activision rules!
Yeah, dude, Activision totally rocks! It's a bit of a shame that the game doesn't feature a story because I feel like that might have tied the levels of the game together a bit better. Whereas like they are now, they all just seem a little bit disjointed because there's no reason that you're going from one Disney film to another. I know the earlier Tony Hawk games didn't have a story either, but I feel that because they were a bit more grounded in reality, they were sort of just emulating a skating career. Whereas with this being a more out there Disney skateboarding game, it probably could have done with a wacky world jumping plotline. But hey, maybe that's just me. Before we jump into the world of Disney though, the first thing we're going to want to do is to go into the options menu and turn Pro Controls on. This will make the game feel exactly like a Pro Skater game and you'll be right at home. The default mode is a sort of easy mode where most of the functions become automatic, and it just feels a little bit weird. It's good that it's there though because this is a game aimed at kids after all, and the Pro Skater games can be a little bit complicated. Speaking of Disney worlds, let's talk about the ones we see in this game. We've got Toy Story, The Lion King, and Tarzan represented here, and with this game having been released in the year 2003, you might think that's a bit strange. After all, Toy Story 2 and Tarzan came out in 1999, and The Lion King came out way back in 1994. So why didn't they pick newer Disney films like The Emperor's New Groove or Lilo and Stitch? Well, I think the reason is just that they knew that the older films were considered to be classics by that point, so it was a safe bet to include them here. Whereas they didn't really know if the newer films had the staying power needed to be featured in a game like this. Another reason is probably that all three of the films featured in the game have a heavy emphasis on child characters, which they probably thought would appeal to the younger audience they were aiming for. So there's young Simba, young Tarzan, and the toys from Toy Story, which makes sense because, well, kids play with toys. Before we begin skating around, we have the option of making our own kid character to use, and I have to be honest, I really wasn't expecting the customization to be this in-depth. There's loads of clothes to choose from, there's scale options, you can change the colour of stuff, and it's all pretty good. I tried to make a kid version of me, so let's have a side-by-side look to see if I was successful. I would say I was pretty spot on, but what do you think? Anyway, after doing that, we actually have the choice between 4 different level branches. Either the Toy Story levels, Tarzan levels, the Lion King levels, or the human character level. This is pretty cool because it gives the player a lot of freedom as to what they want to do, so if they love Toy Story, like me, they can just play all of those levels first and not have to put up with the other ones. And another benefit of this is if you're getting bored with one level type, you can switch it to another and come back to the other ones later. It's a really good amount of freedom, but it does have one effect that could be considered negative. Because there's 3 levels in each branch, apart from the human branch where there's only one more expansive level, and each branch can be played in any order, it basically makes it so the game never becomes at all challenging because it doesn't get the opportunity to slowly ramp up the difficulty. This is fine really because the game is quite clearly aimed at younger kids, but for a pro skater, this is a tiny bit off-putting. I mean, the highest score you have to achieve in the entire game is 150,000, which is absolutely pathetic for a real man like me. Let's begin by taking a look at the human level featured in the game, which instead of being based on a Disney film, is instead set in the real world, what with there being Disney movies featured in the local cinema, and in-game advertising. The Tony Hawk games have always had an element of in-game advertising, using real skate brands and that sort of thing, but I don't really mind that too much because you're gonna want to see those brands represented because they're sort of a part of the culture of it. This game not only has the skate brands though, but also has adverts for McDonald's dotted around all over the place. Now, maybe I'm just overthinking this situation, but isn't it a little bit insidious to have such heavy McDonald's advertising in a game aimed at such a young audience? I mean, you might not think it's too bad, it's only a few billboards after all, but wait, no it's not. There's a full-on actual McDonald's store that's one of the most prominent buildings in the level just sat there, just pushing it on you even more. It even has the famous Golden Arches sign and everything. But the madness doesn't end there, there's even a mission tied to the McDonald's where you become a delivery driver and have to take very specific products to different customers around the level.
The first delivery is a double cheeseburger for Hamish. Take it to him and then come right back.
I mean, just to push this even further, you unlock Ronald McDonald clown shoes after completing this objective. They were really going all out with this, weren't they? There's even a song featured in the game that mentions flipping burgers, so you always relate that back to the McDonald's that you saw earlier in the game, because it's all you can think about now. It's like subconscious advertising. I just love the sweet chili crispy chicken wrap from McDonald's, also available as part of a meal deal. Also, keep a lookout for a wrap of the day deal too, only available at McDonald's. 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 There's also a good amount of Nokia advertising too, and yet again there's a mission where you talk to a Nokia representative and have to go around collecting ringtones from people's phones. I mean, I have no idea how that would even work. But at the end of this mission, all of the citizens of the level get together for a nice Nokia ringtone satanic ritual. You've got to love the sense of community that only Nokia can inspire. But seriously, this is a non-stop barrage of advertising. We're getting Disney thrown at us, we're getting skate brands thrown at us, we're getting McDonald's thrown at us, and we're getting Nokia thrown at us. It's relentless, and I just can't afford everything. But let's take a break from all of that and head over to the Disney levels, where thank God there's no in-game advertising. I mean, imagine how disrespectful that would have been, to have been skating around Pride Rock and bumped into a bloody Burger King or something. The next set of levels that I played were the Toy Story ones, and these ones for me were really the standout levels of the entire game, which is probably helped by the fact that I love the Toy Story series. But as well as that, I think being small in a big real-world location is ideal for a skateboarding game because of being able to grind across rows of dominoes and other everyday household objects. It's like the video game version of those little toy skateboards that were popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. The variety in objectives across the whole game was actually really impressive. You have the repeated ones like the high score, extreme score and skate challenges where you have to find the hidden S, K, A, T and E letters within a time limit that are featured in every level of the game. But for the most part, every other objective is completely original. So you'll find yourself skitching on the back of an alien spaceship to perform a long distance or an extra high jump at the top of a ramp in one level. And then in the next one you'll be smashing plates and ornaments to get back at the hunters who've invaded the jungle, and then you'll be escorting wildebeests to a watering hole in the next level. These unique objectives are the standout thing about the selection of levels, and it was always fun completing them, even though they are all perhaps a little bit too easy. After every objective you complete, you're awarded with either a new character, a new item of clothing, a new deck, a stat boost, or a new special trick, which is awesome because not only are the objectives fun and interesting, but you're also constantly treated with unlockables to give you an even greater sense of accomplishment too. It's a bit of a shame you don't unlock more music in the game though. I feel like this is a missed opportunity not only in this game, but also in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series too. I feel like if this would have been implemented, this could have been one of the most rewarding things to unlock in the entire game. It would have been particularly good in Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure though, because there's only 13 tracks in the game, and it quite quickly becomes a bit repetitive. I mean, the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had 13 tracks, at least in PAL regions, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 had a whopping 35 tracks, so going back down to 13 seems like a severe downgrade. The soundtrack itself is a little bit hit and miss too. With the game being aimed at younger kids, the soundtrack reflects this and has an emphasis on child-friendly pop and rock tunes, but some of it with hindsight just feels a bit cringy. That's not to say the whole soundtrack is bad though. Basement Jaxx Where's Your Head At fits quite well into the game and is subjectively one of the best songs in the entire game. Obviously I can't play any of the songs here because YouTube's copyright system will come for me in my sleep, so yeah, you'll just have to trust me on this. Another nice little detail is that you know how in the Tony Hawk games you can unlock special guest characters and other famous skaters? Well, this game also has an element of that because you can unlock a skater called Lil Romeo, who's a real-world kid rapper and also the son of another rapper called Master P. It's fitting that you would unlock a kid celebrity because, after all, this is a game filled with kid characters, so it all makes sense. One of the more interesting things about this game that separates it from the Tony Hawk series is that it actually has these boss fight objectives where the final goal of the third level of each level branch will feature whoever the bad guy of that particular series is. So in the Lion King level you'll have to race against Scar to the top of a cliff. In the Toy Story level, you'll have to jump across a chasm to get to Zurg and disable his energy field. This entire level is an awesome reference to the intro of Toy Story 2, where Rex is playing a video game based on Buzz Lightyear. And in the Tarzan level, you have to drop this cage onto Clayton, which is by far the worst and most boring boss out of the three. An element of the game that I really enjoyed was how certain objectives will alter the game world and open up new areas or new objects to perform tricks on. So an example of this is where you grind on this globe and make it fall, opening some drawers that become half pipes, and then the globe itself smashes onto the floor and turns into a bowl to do vert tricks on. It gives you yet another reason to do every objective because you never know how the level might be altered afterwards. I've been being very positive about this game so far, and that's because it's genuinely surprised me by just how good it is and how many interesting ideas it has. I was expecting just a poorly produced Tony Hawk knockoff, but that really isn't giving the game enough credit. That being said, there are a few problems I have with the game. The biggest problem with the game for me is that despite feeling a sense of progression because of the amount of stuff you unlock for completing each objective, you don't get much of a sense of progression for completing levels fully. I think this is because of the way the game's character goals are structured. Rather than in Pro Skater 4 where there's just one single campaign mode and it doesn't matter what character you pick because they'll all earn the rewards you gain regardless of who you're playing as, In this game, each individual character has 2 set objectives in all of the levels you can play as them in. So there's 25 hidden collectibles and 1 hidden special collectible per character per level, and you can play as 5 characters per level. So to 100% the game, you'll need to find 125 normal collectibles in every level across all the characters, and also 5 special collectibles on top of that. Needless to say, I'm not doing that for this review because that would take forever. But because doing this is considered a main goal rather than just a side objective, like the gaps are, it means I didn't actually get 100% on any level despite doing all of the main actual goals. So I never got any kind of congratulations for doing any of the levels, which led to that feeling of lacking a sense of progression and accomplishment for full completion of the level goals. They probably should have just had 25 collectibles and 1 special collectible that was tied to the actual level rather than being tied to specific characters. Then I probably would have got 100% in the game because it's much more realistic to achieve. I love how literally every single problem in this game's universe is solved by skating. Like here, this water hole is empty, and to fill it back up again, you just need to grind around it. It literally makes no sense, but I enjoy the stupidity of it all. Another issue is tied to something I just mentioned. Despite the game having 13 characters, only counting the human characters as 1, you can only play each Disney level as a maximum of 5 characters because the Disney characters are tied to their own film's levels. So you can't play as Woody in Tarzan's Jungle or anything like that, which I actually think is a little bit disappointing, even though it wouldn't have made sense. You can't even do it in free play mode either, which is a bummer. The human characters can play any level though, so at least there's that. The voice acting for the most part is actually pretty good, but there's a couple of characters here where it just doesn't sound quite right. Like here, Rex and Ham both sound pretty decent to me.
Help! Something terrible has happened. Ham is caught on top of the toilet and he doesn't want to jump down.
Hey, why don't you see if you can break the high score for Pizza Planet?
But then we hear Woody and Buzz, and they both just don't quite sound right to me, especially when they grunt after bailing. They just sound like Chinese bootleg versions or something.
Howdy, partner! Whoa!
It's also sometimes quite hilarious hearing classic Disney characters use skate lingo as if they're all hip and cool.
Outrageous maneuvers.
It's also really annoying when you come across a character-specific mission that you can't do as the character you're playing as, which means exiting to the menu, picking a new character, and re-entering the level. Which would be fine if the mission was vital to that character's story or something, but it pretty much never is. Like in this example, you need to play as Zurg to take part in a race, but there's no reason as to why Buzz, Woody, or Jessie couldn't just do it. It seems a little bit like padding the game's length out, to be honest. The rest of my criticisms are basically comparing this game to the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater series, which some people would probably consider unfair because this game technically isn't a part of that series, but I mean, come on. This game uses the exact same engine as Pro Skater 4, and it copies the structure of those games too, so I think it's fair game to compare them. Like I said way earlier in the review, pretty much everything trick-wise is present here in Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure that's present in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. But there's a few things missing that I think make the game slightly less fun to play. Primarily what I'm talking about here is the ability to wall ride and boneless. It's odd that these were taken out because these tricks make general movement easier and also make traversal much more satisfying too. Plus, they aren't super advanced techniques or anything, so for them to have consciously gotten rid of them seems weird, especially when they've kept other things in like spine transfers and reverts. I might be talking a load of nonsense to people who aren't super familiar with the Pro Skater games, but yeah, basically there's a few really vital things that you can do in Pro Skater that have been actively removed in this game seemingly for no reason. The basic tricks have also been slightly dumbed down, so rather than having 4 tricks assigned to the up, down, left and right buttons, there's now only 2 tricks, one for left and right and one for up and down. So basically there's a lot less tricks to perform in this game when compared to Pro Skater, But I'm actually fine with this change because at the end of the day, this game is being aimed at younger kids. Overall, the game's just much more digestible and much less complex, but also still has most of the things you'd expect from a Tony Hawk game too. Like manuals, grabs, flips, lip tricks, grinds, spine transfers, reverts, it's all here and it feels just as good as in the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games. I just wish you could boneless and wall ride because they're essential for general smooth movement. While there is a multiplayer option in this game, it's been severely downgraded from the Pro Skater series, only offering 3 game styles to choose from. So we have Horse, where each player takes it in turn to set a high score in one combo, and then the other player has to beat that score. If you fail to beat the score, you receive a letter, and then when the letters spell out a full word, you lose. Whereas in the Tony Hawk games you can put whatever word you want in here, in this game you have to pick from pre-selected words, which I can only assume was done to prevent anything too offensive from being typed in. The next game mode is King of the Hill, where you have to race to an object in the middle of the level and the person who holds it for the longest time wins. And then we have the classic score challenge, where you simply need to get to a set score first by performing lots of tricks and combos. Don't get me wrong, these options are fine, but there were way more modes than this in Pro Skater 4. Graffiti and Combo Mambo in particular were really good modes, and there's very little reason as to why they couldn't have been in Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure too. What we have is fine, but it's a bit bare bones when you compare it to Pro Skater. The last thing I'll say about the game, comparing it to the Tony Hawk series, is that it's slightly disappointing that it doesn't have as much content as the Pro Skater games. There's no creator park, not as big of a soundtrack, not as many goals, not as many characters, unless you count each kid as being their own character. Not as many levels, not as many tricks, and I could go on. It's basically a much more diluted version of a Tony Hawk game, but hey, what's here is good at least. So that's Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure. Would I recommend you give this game a go? Well, I would actually highly recommend it if you're a fan of the older Tony Hawk games. It basically feels like Pro Skater 4.5, and it's way better than Pro Skater 5. Just saying the name of that game makes me want to throw up. This game basically feels like a big budget mod that was officially released as its own game. Having said that though, I probably wouldn't recommend you play this if you aren't familiar with the Tony Hawk games. Which is weird because with this being easier, you'd think it would be a good introduction to the series. But I would actually argue that it's not at all a good introduction, and the reason for this is because it doesn't really tell you how to do anything. I don't like it when games hold your hand too much. But at the same time, these games have a lot of inputs and it could be an extremely high learning curve for people to get over to fully understand everything. But this game doesn't introduce you to anything. It doesn't explain how to grind, flip, grab, manual, lip trick, nothing. It's great that it has a simplified control scheme for people, but it wouldn't have necessarily even needed that if the game did a better job of teaching the basics. Pro Skater 3 had a full-on tutorial mode, and Pro Skater 4 teaches you everything in its career mode. But this game simply doesn't have anything like that. I would say if you're new to the Tony Hawk series, start with Pro Skater 4, because it by far has the best introduction to the game's mechanics. I'm giving Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure a 6 out of 10. I almost wish that I did decimals for my review scores because 6 feels a little bit too low for this game, but then 7 feels very slightly too high, so I guess I'll stick with a 6. Overall, the game is actually really great. The core gameplay is exactly the same as Pro Skater 4, which is a huge positive, but most things that have been added on top of the Pro Skater 4 engine are good too. The graphics are really good, the levels for the most part are pretty good, although I do have to admit some of the levels do have sections that are pretty empty and barren. The variety in objectives is amazing, and the character customization is surprisingly good too, at least for its time. There's just quite a few small issues with the game that all build up and become quite big issues, like how it's quite a bit too easy, the way you need to collect so much as different characters is annoying, It doesn't feature anywhere close to the amount of content as a proper Tony Hawk game. The soundtrack is a little bit annoying at times and gets repetitive due to its small track list, and it's slightly disappointing how characters are locked to the respective levels. It's also a very short game too. Not too short that it feels like it's over before it's even begun, but it does just suddenly come to an abrupt halt when you still feel ready for more. I honestly think this game would have really heavily benefited from a story, even if it was really wacky and stupid. Even though Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure isn't an amazing game or anything, I enjoyed my time with it, and it's by no means a bad game. I would actually argue that it's better than some of the mainline Tony Hawk games, just because that series went really downhill after the PS2 era in my opinion. So yeah, if you see this, give it a chance because it normally goes for quite cheap, and it's a bit of a hidden gem. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and maybe subscribe for more content like this coming soon. Let me know if you've played Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure and how you think it holds up looking back on it today. And until next time, bye!